Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or good day wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the next episode of No Dice, No Glory. Sponsored by our jobs that actually pay us money, we're coming to you not at all live from an abandoned arms factory deep under a mountain in West Virginia. We are proud to proffer to you the finest in wargaming coverage. Without any further ado, let's get this show on the road.
Hey, well, thank you, Sean, once again for that rousing introduction. You know, when this comes out, I have not checked in with Sean, but I think all is still well with him in Ohio. So today, um, we have a really great treat for you guys. It's a game that somebody reached out and said, "Hey, check out our game." And of course, I'm a junkie gamer. Everybody here knows that. And I checked it out, and they wanted to come on the podcast, which means that, hey, this is going to be an exciting one. We're here to talk about Force of Virtue, a skirmish game that takes place in the 15th century. If folks out there think that there's a theme that I'm trading in all my rifle-based games for sword-based games, there may be some truth to that. But I'm going to welcome to the show, of course, all the way. Where are you guys located? Actually, tell us that after I introduce you. But I have Jack and Sam, um, and they're going to talk to us about Force of Virtue. Hey guys, welcome to the show, and introduce yourselves and tell us about that one game you played way back when that knew you were going to be a lifelong gamer.
Oh yeah, thanks so
Hi.
much for having us on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us. Well, currently I'm in Ireland, and I think where is Sam at the moment? Hard to keep track of you.
I'm in Monaco with my fiance, as my life is currently insane. But yeah, just hanging out by the seaside. In terms of, if I'll just go for your first question about the about the game which made us lifelong gamer. I will cheat and I'll actually say it was a mixture of Total War and the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game. Those were the two things that Total War computer games, just that army commanding feel, and then playing the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game to kind of see all the models on the table. The combination of those two things made me like, I want to see both of these continued in my life. And
It's
then
not
when we
cheating. Not cheating to mention too.
Yeah, because Total War was a big influence in, but the main thing that was missing there was like all of the soft factors, right? So that was one thing that we saw in was really hard to model in a lot of war games, but became kind of something that we wanted to try and narrow in on. But anyways, I'm starting to get ahead of myself.
That's
I think
okay. We got plenty of time. But go ahead, Jack.
I think
Sorry.
for me, I'll also do a shout out towards an RPG, Codex Martialis, who was made by a fellow historical fencer, him also kind of influenced my process, especially in combat. But it was, I think, the game in a way that made us gamers as I think careers, getting into HEMA, historical European martial arts, and seeing, because combat and sparring is a game, there's all these dynamics, these strategies, these tactics, and also understanding the context of these historical martial arts that were developed over European history, and seeing how they fitted into like the reality. A lot of we were gamers, we enjoyed fun, fast-playing games, but also from the historian side of it, like this game was in some ways a research notes for us as we researched like the 15th century and read after-action reports from, or memoirs from people fighting at the time. A lot of these mechanics in these games was a way to kind of like fit all of these things we're seeing in and test if they work together and the conditionality of these things.
So on page 3, one thing that struck me right away. I'm going to quote. Our team is made up of historical fencers, riders, reenactors, stuntmen, and academics who are in love with the period we cover. I just asking which one of you guys is the fencer, who's the rider, who are either you guys stuntmen?
Trick
Um,
question. So we've both worked in the film industry. So you can play a drinking game, try and find how many times someone from the design team dies in Vikings Valhalla 3. You'll get very wasted. Um, but also both of us are historically European martial artists. I teach both the U.S. and Europe, and I compete. Sam too. Um, and we ride. We also that's one of the things we do for film. We do mounted combat, sword fighting on horseback. So we do a lot of these different things, and so we want those things to be reflected in a really kind of um, elegant way in the game. You know, not like, and when you start doing these things and teaching these things, you see some things don't matter as much as other things. Some things are priority.
So you guys probably are the most jacked game design team I've ever spoken to.
I don't know. You guys have some pretty cool military guys on, so I don't know.
Yeah.
yeah, maybe when I was in service last year, and now I've let myself go.
Yeah. So, force of virtue, nobody wants to hear me talk about it, but hey, give everybody out there a kind of overview of force of virtue before we get into the why, which of course is going to be totally interesting. But force of virtue, it's a little different than other games. What's it all about?
I'll take that then. So
Yeah.
the basic idea was to do a small unit combat, so 1 to 20 models that plays with in 30 minutes to an hour and is easy for people to get into who may not even have a historical background, but allows you to command troops in these kind of small raids and skirmishes and assassinations that really typify the period even more than the large battles. The large battles come out pretty rarely, but in this time before you have communications and radios, there's a lot of times these skirmishing and these kind of feeler out picket lines and parties become very important. And also these political intrigues that you might know from things like Game of Thrones are very common in the period. But we wanted it to be a system that approached combat and warfare in the same way they viewed it. Where if you read memoirs, they don't really care. They're like spend Bayard, who's one of the biggest, coolest knights of the Italian wars, spends 2 pages explaining details of a skirmish where he did a bunch of cool stuff. And the Battle of Pavia is like 3 lines. They didn't really care as much about the large combat. It was too chaotic. They themselves didn't have felt they didn't have much influence on it. But the small skirmishes, that's where you really showed your prowess. Um, and also they don't when you read the memoirs and you read descriptions of fights, they don't care so much about angles, lines, maneuvers, orders of battle. What they really care about, what were the psychological mindsets of the combatants going in. They say this and this happened because they were full of audacity. This and this happened because, or they didn't break because they were full of fortitude and stalwart. The psychological aspects become way more important in the eyes of the medieval describers of the actions than necessarily, the physical geometry of what's going on. The other thing that we really wanted with it is that we have the ability to do asymmetrical engagements. So the way it works is when you build your army or your warband, we say, you take cards, which the cards can have armor, troops, officers, um, things like factors like your opponent troops might be drunk. There might be a crumbling building that's in the center. There might be some of his troops might have gotten lost. All these things that actually come into play when you start engaging with reality. Um, so you can have a small troop or group that's fighting a larger group, but there's a lot of conditional scenario things that are on their side. The way the command and control works is again based on virtues, so that's where the name comes from. All your officers have a pool of virtues: audacity, speed, prudence, and fortitude. When you give orders, you select how many of that virtue you're going to spend on it. So you can spend 2 speed and 1 fortitude on getting your guys to move, and then you roll a dice for each virtue you spend. So 2 speed dice and 1 fortitude dice, and you pick the best. On a 6, you get a critical success. If you end up having to pick a 1, it's a critical failure. And depending on which virtue you use, that can have different effects. Like speed will give you extra movement when you're moving with it. Fortitude will mean that that dice doesn't count as being spent. Prudence will mean you get extra. You're moving through cover and being careful, so you get an extra defense dice if you get shot at. And those virtues allow you to kind of mitigate luck, in which is how they really thought about virtue a lot of times, is as this with virtue you can withstand fortune.
Why the? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
So yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah.
No, so one of the things I noticed right away, it's you guys picked the Borgia period in Italy,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at a ton of other games, was this something that you guys just loved the history of, or you looked for this was the great place to combine all the things you love, that period of history, and it's not being gamed? What was the rationale for picking the period? Because I find that very interesting, because I tried looking around for other games that covered it and couldn't really find any. Why that period?
Yeah. It's for one thing, especially the late 15th century, it's a very interesting period. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's exactly when when you first start seeing these fencing manuals appear. There are a few in the beginning of the 15th century, but they really start to flower at the end of the 15th. And because it was so close and dear to our hearts, yeah, we absolutely wanted to play in it. And as you say, there aren't many rule sets out there, especially not for a skirmish system. So we settled on Rome specifically because it is really the convergence of so many different different factors leading to one city, because you have pilgrims from all over Europe going there. You have obviously the papal elections, which every king and every power in Europe wants to at least know who's going to become pope, if not influence, and hopefully get their own candidate elected, which makes the entire city during an election season even more heated than a modern election season. You have war bands combing the streets to try and find money, try and find blackmail on candidates to try and force cardinals to vote a certain way. You have even the Ottoman Sultan. It needs to know who is going to become pope, and ideally make sure that people who are a bit more lenient might get elected, and to make sure that he has the Ottoman Sultan's brother escaped to Rome and is being held as a political hostage during this period. So he wants to make sure that he could maybe find a candidate who's willing to trade over this hostage back to the Sultanate, so he can be gotten rid of. So there's all of these different storylines leading to one place, and that's why we want to start there. And who knows, maybe we might try to branch out from there, get a 15th century expanded universe, because this is the same time of the War of the Roses in England, of large scale social upheaval in Germany between free cities and bands of robber knights. There's a lot of stuff going on, but Rome is one place where it all started.
Yeah, I right away, I'm like, hey guys, send me the rule book because I want to check this out, because it's an interesting take on the period. So I think the game mechanics, and I know you started to get into that before, Jack, with how your game works, but one of the things I noticed that this is a small, low density game as far as models, which a lot of folks like. But you also have to capitalize on the fact that all gamers have addiction problems. So yeah, I'm only going to get like 1 or 2 Perry boxes. I think I mentioned to you guys in the run up. Now I have 120, medieval, full French, full English army. But looking at like the games that you played and then going with your mechanics, which I have to say are kind of unique. What was that design process like? And in your opinion, what do you think is the core of this game that kind of makes that engine run?
I think.
I think, Sammy, if you want to take that.
Well, sure. I'll add my thought, which was, as Jack was saying about about fencing and learning how to kind of read people and read what virtues they have, because the 4 virtues that we use came from an Italian fencing master in the 15th century, and learning how to play on someone's virtues was kind of an idea that we wanted to build on. And the main thing is, like, sorry, terrible. Something I have to deal with something here.
I'll carry on that thought. Like, the design process again was very much based on kind of like observing reality and the sources that we're working from, and then kind of developing from there. So it was a combination, reading like a lot of period stuff and also World War II and modern military memoirs, and comparing things and finding like how those realities match up. These virtues also correspond a lot to kind of the medieval humor theory of how they thought medicine and psychology worked. So it kind of, rather than necessarily riffing too hard of other game designs, we really wanted to go for something that reflected how medieval man thought about things and how they conceived of the world, because that's really what game mechanics are. They're kind of physics for a universe.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I like that physics for a universe. So if you hear it again, I stole it, which is
An
I
honor.
steal. No, I haven't had a new idea since the '80s, and that was not a really good idea. Uh, I like the 4 virtues because it kind of is the selector of that character that drills down to all these different skills and talents and abilities that the players can use their models for. And you said this came right out of a fencing manual from the period, or more
Yes.
of a modern
So
one like that? I find that really interesting because you see a lot of games where they try to emulate doctrine training of the period, but you guys are using that as a main staple of this game. How'd that come about?
well, again, so it was kind of, we were looking at we were designing the game, and the first rounds of the game that didn't necessarily have this. We wanted there's one core problem you really quickly run into if you're not doing a post 1500s war game or post 1600s war game that isn't rank and flank. If you're doing single models with hand weapons, you don't have the geometry on your side as a designer. If you're doing guns, the geometry, you get a lot of gameplay and tactics for free based the fact that you're playing on a 2D or 3D map. And guns have linear lines of fire and arcing, kind of overlapping arcs of fire, and you maneuver around cover. But what happens with a hand-to-hand combat game most of the time is you have this maneuver phase, and then you smash your models together, and then you have your stats, and you roll dice until the rules tell you who won. And there's very little, that's very hard to get around that, unless you start getting into doing some really funky stuff with scenarios, which doesn't make much sense. So we needed a way different. We needed a way that troops behave differently, had different advantages, and we went back to how does like fencing with these weapons in real life work, and what are the things that they think is important. So these virtues are based off the virtues of Fiori dei Liberi, And in the book, they're mentioned in Latin. We use the English ones because it's easier. But the combat, it's understand. Also, you get later on, this becomes important. You have like a lot of later military goes, I put this officer here because I know he behaves like this. So if he fucks up, he'll go in this direction, right? So that kind of was something we wanted to reflect, and the fencing manuals were there. We actually had a great kind of ratifying of our hypothesis because a new fencing manuscript was translated after the mechanics were kind of set, which was an Italian condottiere who wrote a fencing manuscript and also military advice. And he goes on the humors. And what he says to do is when you get a bunch of recruits in, you separate them based on their dominant humors into different lines of battle. And depending on what their humors are, kind of like how reactive they are and what virtues they have, they're more effective in the first line of attack, the second line of attack, the third line of attack, or the fourth line of attack. So, and these were things that we were already seeing in the virtue mechanics of the game. So it was great to see that actually, that was a really fun moment to see, oh, we were actually able to create a hypothesis that was then proven, or not proven, but like had some positive indicators.
Yeah, it's almost like you guys turn the Pinocchio of the game characters into a real little boy. They have some very interesting characteristics and qualities that you don't see in other games. And once again, fairness in advertising for those that I haven't played it. I've only read this thing a bunch of times, but I will play it. It's almost like the characters take on attributes and traits that you don't see in a lot of games, just because of the way you use the virtues in the game. I find that kind of interesting, and I think it could springboard. I know you guys know this into more and more interesting narrative play.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that really kind of cool. So going over the four virtues, you guys, if you want to just briefly describe them, but why did you stop there? And if you could take us through why those four, other than being historically, but explain it kind of why they really make great game mechanics, because I just found them really kind of interesting.
Sam, you want to handle that?
Yeah, sure. So we obviously, since we saw these four virtues, we kind of started with them, and kind of on a game design level, we didn't really want to make things too complicated for players. But we also really found it was a tight system with just having to decide, because when you build your warband, you can decide what you want your officers, we call them capos, to have. So you can build a capo, who has a lot of audacia, a lot of audaciousness, and he can get out there, really put the fear of God in the enemy. But if you need him to like hold back, he's not really going to be able to do that. For example, we had a playtest where we had this audacious knight, and he ordered his men to get to the edge of this wall, stack up, so that next turn they could rush around and get to grips with the enemy gunners. Unfortunately, he rolled a crit fail, and he and his men just went around that corner and immediately got halfway towards the gunners and just got gunned down because they ran out, they crit failed, ran out, and couldn't marshal themselves in time to get back beyond the wall or get to grips with the enemy. They were just hanging out there. So we wanted, and once we had a playtest like that coming out, we were like, okay, this is a good system. What we want to do is not necessarily widen it, but deepen it. Add more ways for you to try to get more crit successes, try and force your enemy to crit fail more, and really dive into it that way.
Did you guys design the game? One of the things I found interesting, and you mentioned it, was that the game could be played in an hour. Um, is that the way it came out in play testing, or was this a design feature you guys put in?
very much a design feature. We when we started designing the game seriously, we made ourselves a very tight design brief on what it should require to play and how long and what the objective of feel was. And when we write a deck, we usually write a brief on what feelings that deck should have, what the core source material for developing it is, etc. But yeah, we wanted something that was really tight, fast to play, and could get campaign games in very easily. Also, there's something that like the game is both. The game can be kind of unforgiving if you make tactical mistakes of a certain order because it is reality based. Um, so a shorter game means that you're not if you make a mistake in the first 15 minutes of a 3 hour game and you only see it in the last 2.5 hours, the last half hour of the 3 hour game, kind of
Mhm.
sucky. Or if even you sit there for 2 hours going, yeah. So we wanted something that was like fast to play, fast to set up, and also gave people a really realistic reason to get out of there if they'd made a mistake. So one of the things about the game is you get one victory point for achieving the objective because you're always there because you have an objective. Otherwise, why are you risking troops and assets? Which is a very condottieri medieval mercenary way of looking at things, at least. Um, and then the second victory point you get is if you end the game with 50% of your troops alive. So fled still counts as alive. So it actually incentivizes you if you know you can't get the objective and you're just going to lose men to get out of there. I always really leaves a bad taste in my mouth, even in sci-fi or fantasy games. The game is asking me to fight to the last man over some pointless hill. That just feels very, very deeply wrong to me on a kind of a gut level. I don't like doing that. So I wanted something that really respected the idea that you have troops that are in your care that you need to make decisions about.
Which is, to me, definitely was something I was getting into with you guys, is the real world decision making this game takes the player through. And you bring up such an interesting point about sometimes in 3 hour games, you've lost it. Look, I play a lot of games just like you guys. You only realize that after the game and you throw your dice across the hall, where players keep going. But it's that way of balancing the game from one bad decision, or even one of the questions following up on that is bad list making. I love list making in games because while I'm not playing the game, I'm making lists. But is there any way I can, like, I'm definitely going to lose with this list? The game seems to be able to balance out some of the common mistakes players made. Did you guys find that in playtesting?
I mean, there is like a variable rate. Like if you decide your cards, your list, um after the scenario is set, so you know what you're going to be going into, so you have a little bit of a heads up. You don't necessarily know what your opponent is going to take. You know what decks they have access to, and that will give you a hint. um but if your opponent decides to take all like heavy armored knights and you don't take anything to counter that, you might have them. But in general, even if they do, they're going to have very few models, and you will generally then, I mean, if unless you're doing some very, very elite light infantry, you'll have much better mobility, much better ability to focus on objectives, ability to kind of play defensively, get a ring of light armored guys around him, and then invest heavily in defensive dice, just poke and prod and not get involved while someone else does the objective. So there's a lot of decisions you can use to even out bad list making. But list making is definitely a part of the game, and one that you can enjoy. Um, and you also you don't have because you combine decks, so you have nation decks, which are um, your Swiss, Germans, French, Condottieri, Spanish, and then you have character decks, which are like Dogs of War, which are your kind of dastardly mercenaries, and Fires of Faith, which are your religious zealots of the period, and you have Born to Battle, which are your kind of like stompy, chivalrous knights. and Renaissance man, which are kind of like your Renaissance men of the period, but they also have gunpowder and chemistry and expanded knowledge. And then you have your scenario deck, which has a lot of the kind of more scenario-based things, like having city militia that is hostile to both sides on the board, or NPCs that can help you do objectives. But you're combining up to 2 nation decks and 1 character deck. So you have 3 decks you're pulling from, or you can do multiple character decks and 1 nation deck. And then plus you can always take cards from the scenario deck. So there's a lot of options and ways to counter all the main builds. And all the main builds kind of have predators built into the deck, where if you build like one really, really high-powered commander, there's ways of taking him out, or really focusing in on one guy, or if you have a bunch of guys spread out, you can also work with that. Or if there's a lot of different builds, and there's a lot of ways of countering them.
So I can't screw it up that bad.
You'd have to try. And there is a there is things you can do, like if you where you'll start to realize, oh, that might not have been smart, but generally they tend to be things that if you look at it from a historical or realistic period, if you have a whole bunch of guys and only one officer who's not very well respected or trusted, things can go very badly for you very quickly, because you don't have much morale space to work with. You'll take a couple hits and people will start leaving.
Just like in real life. So the
Yeah.
decks of the game, which is really the kind of the heart of the game, because, excuse me here for a second, because the decks are part of your activity building, list building, as it were. They also are the kind of the heart of the game. How did you guys arrive at using that as the mechanic? Well, first, briefly go over for everybody why that's such a big feature in the game, and then how did you guys arrive at the decks? Because a lot of them are for status tracking, a lot of them are for player A type, but it also adds so much to looks like the play of the game. How did you guys come up with that mechanic after you decided we're going to use some cards here?
So the way it works on a basic level is you play a game to a certain number of cards. Like a 10-card game is your kind of like entry level, up to kind of 20, 25 is like where you're really getting into quite large games, and over 16 to 18, the game starts kind of creeping up over the hour mark. But the way it works, each card is equal to each other. There's no like points values for the card. So you play, and then you have logistics cards, which are your troops and your ammunition and your officers, and they 50. So you can only have a maximum of 50% of your force be logistics cards. The rest are things like virtue, which give you morale. So that or specific trainings or doctrines or assets or strategic things like an ambush or advanced deployment, or even maybe 2 of your opponent's commanders don't like each other and they don't work well together. So we wanted all those things to be possible, and the way to think about the list building, I think, is not necessarily I'm paying for things, but like as that commander is standing there, look, and he's made contact with the enemy and is looking at the enemy, what are the factors that he's judging that make it possible to either go into this or decide that it's not worth fighting and losing? The way that it kind of happened was we definitely decided we wanted to have the ability to do things like a really elite force that has very little morale, or a very lightly armored green force with not much training but has a bunch of morale, or like ambushing peasants, or all these different things that you see in the sources but are generally very hard for games to pull off, and without resorting to fixed scenarios. We wanted those to be possible. So basically it came down to like boiling them down to, okay, these are factors, how can we represent factors, and then having the cards, we'll put the factors on cards, and that's kind of how the logic flowed of it.
Yeah, because once we have cards, you can offload a lot of the mechanical complexity onto those cards as just a way to have the rules there. Everyone can see them, and if you're not playing with that card, you don't have to worry about the complexity. It's not in the rule book. You don't have to flip through it. It's just you're just have to play with what you have on the table, pretty much.
Yeah, and that actually goes into the next question. One thing, it's the X factor in all games, which is the player. Players have particular styles. One thing I noticed with the way the cards work in this game, if I know my playing style, I can make a force that is perfectly tailored to my, as a player, strengths and weaknesses. Was that something that you guys wanted to do, or it was a happy accident?
I think it was very much a design choice that we wanted to make that possible. Like a lot of this period is very a la carte in that you don't have. It's not like World War II where you have a fixed squad and these are the weapons and this is how we've kind of started. Or and World War II may be a bad example, but we've kind of figured out how weapons work and tactics work, so we're going to do that. This is a bridge between this period is a bridge between the late Middle Ages and the kind of pike and shot period where you're starting you have all these new capabilities coming up paired with these like learned doctrines from medieval warfare and these incredibly powerful knights that are some of them are very, very good at what they do, and you're combining and you're figuring out how does advanced gunpowder weaponry with rifling in the barrel in some cases interact with knights in full plate. Some of the armor can stop those guns, and how do you do combined arms with all these things, and how do you this increased centralization of garments, how do you deal with that? So they're in this problem solving list building mode in reality, which we wanted to kind of bring into the game. um, and they're training each of their guys individually, and it's either going to be good or bad. There's no quality control. Um, so we wanted that kind of thing, and also, yeah, we wanted as game that the players have choice, and I thought that was something that from a good place to bring it in for the players in this period to really get an idea of it. I think that's something also that a lot of fantasy players who come in really appreciate about it.
So when I first read the rules, I had this assumption, and I want to ask, somebody on this design team is a diehard RPG player that really likes RPGs and wanted to bring that into a miniatures setting. This is my assumption. I think it works great, but I'm curious to see if that actually was a factor when you guys were going back and forth about why don't we design a game.
I
Yeah,
think
definitely guilty. We both play RPGs, but I definitely love them. Absolutely get stuck into them. I think a lot of the flavor that came into the miniature game actually came from the modeling side of it, which Jack is a hell of a lot better at painting and modeling than I am.
yeah, I think yeah, there's definitely that RPG, and like we took a lot of design influence from a game Codex Martialis, which uses a lot of this similar stuff. But I think a lot of the RPG stuff, and also just came in from, again, reading through things like Benvenuto Cellini's autobiography, and he's very much like a D&D-esque murder hobo in real life. And also again that modeling a lot of the things like I was like I would really like to model some guys with carrying severed heads. Also, because I read a source about guys carrying severed heads and attaching it to their saddlebags. And then I was like, okay, that needs a card. Or even the virtue thing. Like part of the reason why the virtues happened was I was like, I'd get put together a Perry model and go like, he looks like a really audacious badass. And then I'd put him on the table and play a different game with him, and he just wouldn't behave like that. And I was like, but that feels kind of sad. Um, so we wanted that kind of storytelling, that kind of cinematic aspect of how things build up, definitely and that's very much, as you say, an RPG thing.
No, it's a game. By no means. I think most people know I don't play a lot of them. In fact, I played my first one last year, and you can listen to that. I didn't do that great. So I think that's an amazing thing. And I think it goes back to the personalization of the characters that are in the game. And you just said it. This knight's really kind of badass. I want him to play like that. Um, I think more games should do that. From talking to so many designers, they're like, well, I started taking stuff from miniatures or board games, and I had to push all that stuff out. And I'm like, embrace the change. I think in this case, it makes it a very almost intimate game with the force that you build, and two players going head to head in this game. That to me is some of the ingredients of, wait, I'm going to say it, a fun game. The fact that I could play it in an hour, even more. I can get that immediate rush, the adrenaline high from gaming. I think it's an amazing thing in this game. I think the personalization of almost everything in this game, I think puts the players through some amazing decisions. I think it just comes out. One thing that we've all mentioned so far is the narrative aspect of this game. Do you guys want to talk to that about why this game really kind of, from what it seems, pulls it off way better than a lot of other games?
I think
I think the where it comes from is narrative comes from bounded choice. Like you establish characters in a narrative, and the characters have to react realistically to obstacles that make sense in realistic ways within the bounds of their character. Um, and I think one thing that helps us with that is your commanders have virtues. They have personalities. And if I put that, they will sometimes react according to their personality, whether you want it or not. And that's just how humans work. Anybody who's led a team will know that you have to understand the personalities of the people you're working with and put them in the place where their personality will work for you, not against you. And I think that and also these customization, these little factors that are the unexpected quirks that make such a big part of it is, I think, one thing that makes it like, everybody who has funny military stories, it's usually about someone's personality and something unexpected reacting with a third thing in a completely hilarious way.
We could do a whole show on that, guys. I got a lot of stories.
Like,
But
yeah, go on, sorry.
I really like that approach. I find that really kind of interesting. So going through the different factions that can play in this game, when you guys said, okay, here, check out the files, you got a lot of factions here. Was there ones that this game needed to have it, like the Condottieri, or this is a fun little faction, why don't we add it? Because I think the factions are kind of neat in this, and I didn't pick up is that you can kind of mix some of the factions together, it seems, or maybe I heard that wrong when you guys were explaining it.
Oh
Talk to
yeah.
us a little about the factions.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, you can absolutely mix your warbands together. You can make a Swiss French warband. You can make a Condottieri Spanish warband, because you have all of these different groups mixing in Italy at this time, mixing and matching their different styles of warfare. And like I found a mention of Swiss training instructors being bought, kind of hired by the by the Kingdom of Spain, which is newly kind of unified to train their troops. But you also have Spanish instructors working who then moved to Ireland slightly later. So you have all of these different tactics are being taken to different places, changed slightly, and then changed by the next party. And as far as factions go, yeah, as you can see, you just mentioned Ireland. We have so many different factions which we could put in, and wanted to put in, but obviously at some point you have to get the thing out the door. So
What's
we
the
have to
number
rework
one
it.
faction that didn't make it in?
Oh God.
Probably English.
Yeah. English are currently pretty high on the list.
Yeah, the Pommies are in too many games as it is now.
That was one reason why
Yeah.
we decided to put them on the back bench for the first release.
Yeah. So like at the moment we have again Spanish, Landsknecht, Swiss, Condottieri, and French. And again, when I think it's more if you're not familiar with the period to realize these aren't nations; these are kind of places where soldiers might come from and then hire on. You could easily have French working for Italians fighting French. It wouldn't be that strange in the period at all. And yeah, so hopefully as things go on, we'll expand and release more decks. I mean, we're currently gearing up for a Kickstarter to add cavalry and siege mechanics to the game. So that'll be a thing. But like, there's a lot of different places we can go with the factions, and as things expand, we have a lot of freedom to kind of do more different stuff with it, even as far flung as India and the South China Seas, which are being explored at this period by the Portuguese, or even, of course, South America, all those different places. There's a lot of place we'd love to go into, but it'll depend on kind of timing and how much gas in the tank we have.
Yeah, it's not a full-time job, I think, for anybody. Very few game designers, it's a full-time job. So, but the game system is so fungible and I think very clear that adding these other players or these other factions within the game or playing styles, it doesn't look like that would be. I mean, you're gonna have to play test the hell out of it, but it doesn't look like it's that hard. I think great games can do that, where here are the base rules, here are the base mechanics, and then now you could plug and play and design what you want. I think the game is, like I said, I will play this game. It looks like it's resilient enough just because of the way the rules are written. Um, did I get that one right? Or he's like, these
Yep.
guys are texting to each other. This guy's on drugs.
No. You're absolutely
Oh.
correct. There's I think there's certain periods where the themes might not stack as well. Like Napoleonics, I don't know whether like it would in some ways work, but some of the core themes might not, like in that virtue is out of fashion and rationality is in during the Enlightenment. But things like even that we've considered like out of batted around the idea of doing this even as World War II squad level, because it would work really well for that, in that you have a lot of these kind of, replace the virtues with guts or moxie, and all those things, and like you get a lot of these decision making things and personality coming through in World War II memoirs and the stories that we heard from our grandfather. A lot of these things are reflected as well. So it'd be really fascinating to see, and all these decisions you make of the factors. You can bring in supporting fire via cards and stuff, and you can have all these things of like putting dice into attack versus putting dice into defense. They're just how combat works. Do I expose myself and do more damage, or do I be more conservative and keep myself more safe? Those are just this core decisions you make.
Yeah, and I hope John Stollard isn't listening from Warlord Games, but one of the things, if you notice, a lot of their games are really built on the same mechanics. Go figure, same designer.
Yeah.
Also, they came from Games Workshop, so a lot of the games have the same feel. If I could play this game, I could play them all, and even like the Blood series, right?
Yep.
From working on some of those, just to get the feel of that period with the core mechanics, sometimes it's a stretch, and that's why the games, thankfully, play so differently. In this, it's for this period, it just really kind of works, and it works for one thing that you guys have been clear on from the beginning is that this is a more immersive narrative I'm pulling my gamer into, that it just works in this period so well because it is an interesting period. Heck, I think HBO did a miniseries on it.
Yep. Yeah, I think
Which
they.
never watched it, but
Mm,
yeah. Now I will, by the way.
The other one that I definitely suggest is there's an excellent podcast by another bunch of historical martial artists called L'Arte dell'Armi, which is about following the careers of various military commanders of the period, and the duels they get in with each other, and all the kind of intrigue and espionage and commando missions that go on, which is a great kind of entry to the period, including there's one great episode on a gang war between two different monastic orders in Bologna over who had the rights to perform necromantic rituals for the nobility. So you get a lot of fun stuff going on, especially the more you actually go into the period.
So we're looking at Forces of Virtue, the zombie game, pretty soon, right?
I can neither confirm nor deny whether things might start sneaking in where as optional add-on decks, especially if you were to say if we do like Wallachia or some of the other bits. But yeah, it's all the mechanics are there that you can tweak. The thing is, like you with the mechanics is we did front load things a bit. Like there's a few things like at the beginning that catch people off guard, like managing how to manage your faith and virtue and actions in that kind of triangle.
Yeah.
That catch people off guard at first. But the reason that's that way and a lot of the mechanics are built is it's a little bit of a complexity at the beginning, but then later on we can tweak it subtly without breaking the game because things all hook into each other. So even if you add a whole bunch of something to one stat, it's unlikely to completely break the game because there's checks and balances built into the core mechanics.
Which kind of goes to the fungibility of your basic game design. It's resilient to play. Hey, let's throw in a little undead army in here. It seems to work. I am sure you guys will playtest the heck out of it, which is going into my next question. So a bunch of you got together and said, "Got a great idea." I've worked in groups like that too, and it's like the Beatles towards the end. They're not all getting along. What were one of the things that you guys started with? Like, hey, we really want this in a game that didn't really kind of make it through that initial play test and design phase. And then what was the most contentious? Usually it's both. Because I think when gamers go into games, I mean, just go on social media. Every gamer can create the world's best game. They just don't because it's hard. Um, in your design process, I'm sure it was an iterative process between these fencers, actors, unless it's just the two of you guys. But what was kind of the surprises when you started play testing? What was contentious? And what just didn't make the cut after you've played it a few times within the game?
I think so like the game design and most of the core concepts like cards happened around and virtues happened around 2014. And then it just got shelved as research notes that we added into until COVID, and then we kind of like ramped it up. And there's been like a bunch of things that went back and forth that me and Sam toy with together, and other designers that help a bunch. I think the one thing that probably was more contentious at the beginning that we were thinking of bringing in was more complicated deployment mechanics, like hidden deployment and blinds and things like that we enjoy, like and we were like, or like light troops deploy farther in than heavy troops or stuff like that. um I guess that, and also like how to design the scenario deck necessarily, I think might be it. But like I think because all the designers come from a HEMA, a historical martial arts background, we all have that common language and that common ethos of follow the sources that I think helped us kind of like solve the problems. And we had that strict design brief of like how long things could take, how much resources the players should need for this. those kind of that mission brief kind of helped solve a lot of the problems going in, I think. But Sam can tell me if I'm talking out my ass.
No. I think there's like fairly minor mechanical differences which can really really change how the game plays. Like one of the things that we like, at least because we all had a shared background, we could generally always agree, okay, we need to model this. And the problems would always come like, okay, how do we do that? How do we make it like, because if we obviously we can add this whole other system onto it, but then that's going to be taking up a lot of the broadband have to take up a lot of the attention of the player, and it'll detract from the core design. So there's things like we had a lot of discussion about whether we wanted to have actions as well as faith, which is how many dice you can roll around. If we wanted to limit players that way, but we ended up settling on the current design just because it was a way to kind of keep the game moving and keep the game bounded without making it too cumbersome or cutting out too much of the flavor.
I think the other one that probably will end up coming in with later decks and being more adding a bit granular. We did have a certain point where it had cut off no more. The core rules are now set. No more added elements to the mechanics. One thing that we might add in a little bit more is the concept of sidearms versus main arms, which will become important, especially in the upcoming cavalry deck, because you can't have a pocket halberd, but if your lance breaks, you can have a longsword as as a backup, or certain scenarios where you might, you can't like be seen to be showing up to the meeting with halberds, or else you're giving away the cards that you're not really here for diplomatic reasons. So that concept of sidearms versus main arms might come in. But the good thing is, generally speaking, if we have these things that we want to add in, we can put it on a card and then ask the player whether they want to include it or not.
which is great. So, what was the hardest thing that you guys so wanted, and you ended up? It took a lot of mental equity to put in the game and to get it right, because there's a lot of little things, and I appreciate games that they have their the game engine, but under the hood, there's a lot of little things that they've abstracted that are going on. This game has a lot of that, but the player, I hope, notices, because it's all based on ease of play. What was the hardest thing to put in this game?
I think I think the first one that comes to mind for me is hand-to-hand combat, because you have this problem that I said, like, when you're maneuvering elements on the table with firearms, you have this, holding force, maneuver force, cover. Am I shielded? Am I not shielded? Am I exposing? Am I not exposing? That's played out in the geometry of the board. These are things that happen just like, in a boxing match. You don't where the hands are, where you're stepping, all those things matter, but you can't really, like, with models on a table, it's very hard. You can't really be posing them all the time to show like what you're opening, what you're not. It'd be dumb anyway. So how do you abstract the choices you're making in combat into, and the kind of the limitations that you have going in, that you're building your tactics around, because tactics are all about dealing with limitations, and or and strategies is about limitations. So you need that. So we just basically brought it down to, and this is partly, again, thanks to Codex Martialis, of like a dice pool mechanic where you're investing over your round. You have the certain amount of dice you can invest into actions, and during that fight action, you can put dice into attack or defense. So I can go all out on attack, but if you attack me at the same time, I can't parry. If you manage to just hit me, and it'll be fairly easy if you're putting a couple dice into it, then I'm hit. So you can get people mincing through each other. You can do things like the front rank of halberdiers. Weapons have reach, so reach over, you can attack from farther away. The longer weapons hit first. I can do things like I can have an initial rank of guys with halberd attacking and getting people to use up their defense dice, or even just shielding, so they get attacked and they get to defend. Second ranks to take away the defense dice of the opponent, and then once the opponents have no more dice to defend with, the third rank, I can order the third rank of pike, and they can really just go for the kill and nail those guys because they're being tied up by the second rank. And these are things you find in descriptions of combat and how and advice on how to conduct combat. And you can do those things in the game, but you need a commander with a bunch of virtue who can do those individual actions, coordinate the troops without getting himself strung out. And that costs cards to do.
Yeah, one thing I noticed in a lot of miniature games when you develop your war band, that you have units. So you have a unit of pikemen, a unit of archers, and really all they do is add as hit points in a dice pool, and you attrit them. Most players don't know it. It seems that this one plays more based on, yes, the leader, but the singular models with their distinct capabilities. Happy accident, or was this done with volition?
Well,
Yeah,
we
we absolutely
so
wanted. Sorry, go on.
you go on, Sam.
No, but we absolutely wanted to have that combined arms aspect because we wanted to have the individual models have their own place in your warband. So obviously, when you have your gunners, you need to be able to make sure that they will be able to do their job, so that it won't be caught up in melee. So you need to have light infantry who can try to intercept enemies who might try to get to your gunners. But we also didn't want to necessarily prescribe the right solution, because one tactic might be to try to intercept enemy skirmishers before they can get to your guns. Another tactic might be to ambush your gunners into a position where they can't be easily dealt with. Another tactic might be to just try and use terrain, or use, for example, the weather to try and slow down your enemy. So you can say play a mud card, which might mean that the area is very muddy and it's hard for heavily armored troops to move around in it. So you can try to use these tactics together, similar as you would in a modern scenario, where you would try to use terrain to, say, limit. If your enemy has a main battle tank, you want to try to use terrain to limit its visibility, because if you get seen by it, it will very likely destroy you. Whereas if you are trying to deal with an enemy light infantry platoon, then being seen by them isn't necessarily the issue. It's or rather, what they can do isn't necessarily the issue. It's what the people on the other side of the radio can do to you. So likewise with us, our brief is a bit simpler, because obviously we don't have to deal with all of the same issues. But it's a lot of the combined arms tactic comes from how do you deal with your enemy's units, and what solutions do you bring to the battlefield to try and get the right thing to happen.
Yeah, and the idea of units in the period, like squads and distinct groups, doesn't really go back to the sources. We always go back to the sources and then how things work in reality. Like, you don't have discrete squads. That's just not how that worked in that period. And even if in reality, if you think about it, a lot of it goes down to even how the virtues work. If you think when someone gives an order in a stress situation, their voice carries an awful lot of information in it. Whether they're telling you to keep calm, whether they're telling you to go for it, what they're saying, how they're saying it matters as much. So think of when your officers give commands as their verbal commands, which contain emotional information with it. So it's like second rank, go, is different than second rank, go. It's that difference in how you add that virtue and you're giving specific orders to specific people like you would in like they did in reality. There's an excellent example of a description of a cavalry skirmish where it was the son-in-law of the fencing master who later wrote the son-in-law's biography about the fight, talking about how the son-in-law hung back during the fight and gave fencing coaching instructions to his men on how to defeat the Burgundian heavy horsemen, which then won the battle. And it says he did the right thing because he's not supposed to get in and fight. He's supposed to command and coordinate his troops and give them fencing advice on how to deal with the problem.
Yeah, yeah, it's I like from reading this. Um, I noticed the little things you guys put in, and especially the real world decision making and the emotion. And very few games capture emotion. This game, I don't think it's an happy accident. I think this was from reading it. Once again, I will play this game, folks. Uh, it's in there, and games kind of miss that. When you guys were play testing this, what were the tables like with the hour game? Like, you guys would sit back and watch folks play it. Um, it seems like players were constantly making decisions and thinking, which not every game does that. But what was the level of fun at that table as this was going on?
Generally pretty high.
Yeah. And we mentioned it before, but it was one thing of was a little victory when we saw players getting into melees. It wasn't just like generally if you have especially mass battle games, that's the moment. Yeah, you get into melee, and then you roll dice until maybe one unit breaks, and then the game can continue. But until then, it's just dealing with the math hammer of just making sure something happens sometime, hopefully. But we saw people getting to melee and going like, "Oh, okay, so my officer's tied up here. He managed to get someone through to so he can't rally his troops now. So I need to either I could maybe try to use speed to just knock this guy out, or I could use fortitude to try and push him back, make some space so my officer can get back to rallying and doing his job." So you had people really making choices there, and that was one thing that was really nice to see.
Yeah, and you have also the cards. Some of the cards are hidden with hidden effects. Like, and if you fight which faction you're playing will dictate a lot of times how you feel about what's going on. Like, the Swiss, they're not complicated, they're just really scary, and they're really tough, and just getting them to run is hard. Or you're fighting Condottieri where he has like 2 or 3 hit cards in his hand that you can't see what's going on, and you're really worried what those are going to be, because there's a good chance he's going to pull out poison or bribe or something at the wrong time, and then you're going to get screwed. So you're walking on eggshells, being really conservative, which allows him or her the advantage to kind of like go out and go for the objective or something. So it's that what we really loved is seeing people actually do that. Like, one of the fun examples was, someone played poison, and then the other player also had the card deceive, just the deceiver. So you had a little bit of a Princess Bride moment where all of a sudden, um so you get a lot of those fun moments coming in that start to mirror the sources, and that's one thing that always brings joy to our hearts.
Of course, designers. I used to always say, oh, I just said it last week. Designers like their kids. They love their games. Do not, you know, don't besmirch their games. They get awfully upset. Um,
We I mean, like, in some ways we have been sometimes pretty ruthless with our game. There's like, and we in the Discord, if you go into our game Discord, you'll see like there's quite often we have core players who will tell us like this thing needs to be fixed, and we'll fix it, because I think that's comes from also working in like as coaches and in the film industry. You kind of have to stop being precious about your work, even if you love it. Just because if you work, just because you like your horse doesn't mean he needs to stop doing some dumb shit.
yeah, yeah, which is great. A lot of games do crowdsource some of that stuff, and they're always, one thing gamers have is opinions, They're not always
Yes.
100% correct. And it's, as long as the design team has a process to look at these individual things, I think it's a great process that's using, uh, crowdsourcing really well. A lot of times people will be on your playtest teams that don't understand what we're trying to do here with this game. You still want to listen because gamers think of the damnedest things. But, I could tell the pace of this game, the fact that there's stuff hidden, and how the game could kind of turn. I do want to play this game, and I promise, to see like how that balance works throughout the whole hour. But you can tell this game, despite the fact that you guys put some complex stuff in here, this game is not hard to play. Matter of fact, even in the rules, you could have a detailed play or fast play, and a lot of game designers don't do that because no, they have to appreciate the entire symphony. They don't get to hear the overture and leave. I really like that, and I think that's what when I started reading the rules, that hooked me in very quick. That you guys not only understand game design, you understand the community because you're part of it, and that just really kind of shows through in the game. It's it's there's a lot of interesting takes, folks, in this game, and like me, a lot of folks just love reading rules. I love reading rules, um, because every once in a while you'll read a set of rules and you're like, I love how they did that. Matter of fact, I had a whole conversation last night with two guys that are, also work in my field, and I refer to it as beauty and art, very symphonic. They just make it flow. This game really kind of has that flow that I don't know if it was done on purpose, but it definitely it's there. It's just really kind of interesting. One of the things that I know folks are going to ask because of the period, and I think we talked about it at the beginning, or actually before we started recording, is Perry does not make a Borgia box, but they should. So if you two guys are listening, please. Um, the models in the game. What does a besides the book, the rules, some of the tokens? Um, what does a player need as far as models? Because I'm already eyeing the War of the Roses box here from
So,
Perry.
like, if you want to just try the game, on the website we have a tutorial mission that's downloadable. So it's it teaches you the game over 3 missions, and it has downloadable tokens, standees, rules, all those things. So it has everything printable that you'd want to use if you just want to try it out. Also, you can join us on like Saturday nights, 7 p.m. GMT, via our Discord, and we play over Roll20, and you can learn the game with us. We're usually leading those game design nights, those playtesting and game nights. As far as like physical models, again on this website, there's a list of per different nation which boxes make the most sense. But generally, a European mercenaries box from Perry will give you 2 to 4 warbands easily that you can play with. So you can get an entire club going just on that one box. And they do have some very nice Italian miniatures in their kind of pewter line. Unfortunately, not in there. Then you can also get the Perry pewter Italian heads and put them on the miniatures. But yeah, they have a bunch of stuff. You only need 1 to 20 again, so you're not going to need much. It's pretty easy to get into. If you want the whole like shebang, you do need there's also starter forces to try and start out, but then after that you'll need to get if you want the kind of full thing, you can buy the cards either from our website, Masterstroke Games, or Phalanx Consortium. Also now carries the products in the US, and also then there's the starter box, which has plastic tokens, custom dice, all the kind of like fancy schmancy stuff that you can find on our website.
Yeah, and we love Chris. He's I'll tell you what, one of the most passionate guys I've ever met about this hobby. I know you guys said he says hi at the beginning, and I love Chris and Steph. Man, they're awesome. Because that was the other question: where does one get this? And it looks like Phalanx Consortium has it, so that's a good place to start. Now, you guys also mentioned a Kickstarter
Yep.
and horses, so when's that kicking off?
So we're at Salute in the UK. We're going to be doing a massive siege campaign game on a 3x4 meter model of the town of Gradara as it was in the siege in 1446. And cavalry play a massive role in this because Mondo Malatesta does cavalry raids into the Sforza siege camp to kind of drive them off, and of course sieges are a thing. So when we got asked to do this, sieges and cavalry were kind of on the back burner after a couple other nation decks, but they jumped the queue and became a big deal. And we have to do them anyway. So the Kickstarter is like if people want us to do larger prints of these. So it'll be sometime probably end of April that it's kicking off, but you can sign up to our newsletter or follow the Kickstarter to kind of be alerted. But the way it's going to work is the siege campaign is basically over multiple small games that allow you to do things like, of course, make wall assaults, but also sallies to destroy siege equipment, supply raids, attempting to fight in siege tunnels or secret passages, all these things that again you find in sources, especially of the Siege of Gradara, are going to be in there. And the cavalry is because we ride horses, we fight, we want something that horses and too often in these games just kind of glitch around the battlefield. They have momentum. It's like fighting on horseback is like much more like aerial combat. You have momentum, turning radiuses, maneuvers you can do, ladder, you have, Himmelmans
Physics.
and barrel rolls, like
Physics are real.
they're all, yeah, you have all these, and then more skilled riders can do more things. The virtues your horse has, their personality plays a massive effect on it. So that's cavalry has always been that's been a cavalry small unit combat has always been a massive kind of passion of mine, my main focus of research. So I'm looking forward to bringing that in. We just didn't want to start with the most complex thing. And cavalry is definitely going to be a thing. Like if you want, it's going to be, we're going to keep the same elegance as much as we can, but cavalry and horses in the game is going to be, if you want just a little bit more teeth and bite,
Right.
it'll definitely give you that, and it'll be unforgiving and detail oriented, just like horses actually are.
Yeah,
But
well,
it'll be high risk, high reward.
I hate painting horses, just to
You
throw
won't
it
have to
out
paint
there.
many. You won't have to
Well,
paint money. It's like 3.
great. I mean, because right now I'm doing by fire and sword, which is
Lovely.
yeah, it's I don't know why I'm getting into another period, because you know how it is. You get into one and then
Yeah.
bam, yeah, you run out of space in your house. So I just hate painting the horses. But the Perry horses are great to paint. They're really kind of awesome, and paint horses do have certain temperament.
Oh yeah.
Usually, that's why they were there. I mean, big cavalry armies didn't take horses to battle that were scared of gunfire. So horses have to act in a certain way. You ever notice that every game that has English cavalry or British cavalry, they have that impetuous rule where they just have to charge
Yeah.
something?
Hmm.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
I'm trying to find out historically how many times that actually happened, but it's in every game. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I think so. You definitely have the a lot of times in medieval periods, the horses were described by their job title or their function rather than their breed, because breed wasn't a thing. So you have destriers, you have coursers, you have roundseys, you have amblers, and they have different things. And one thing, from when you train horses, you kind of realize, especially the more refined breeds, like each horse has its own stress reaction to like how they, some want to go forward, some want to buck, some get aggressive, and just like humans react differently under pressure. So one thing is like if you have a horse like a more like a thoroughbred that when they start getting they don't know what's going on or they get worried, they just go faster forward. I mean, there's you can kind of plan on that and know what's going to happen. So there's going to be things like that about you need to understand what your horse is going to do and preempt it or use it to your advantage.
Yeah, and there's like as we were saying with horses having different personalities. 3 different horses, same period. There's one horse in a duel where they're both circling each other, and one guy manages to unhorse his opponent, but his own horse is freaked out by this guy falling on the ground and ends up bucking off his own rider, just because he wasn't trained correctly. Whereas another horse, um, there's it's Bayard, not Bayard. He was in a battle, and his horse just saw a formation of pikes and just decided, you know what, we're going to kill them, and just ran directly into them. And Bayard ended up jettisoning off his horse, just letting the horse go in, and he crawls back into camp, and though he sees his horse like go out the other side of the formation, and crawls back, and his biographer says he did not want to deal with that horse again. It's just, nope, that horse was certifiably insane, going to write that one off. And then a third horse was in the Battle of Ravenna, I believe. It was cut through with 2 pikes and too many and innumerable sword blows, and they just had to leave it on the battlefield. And I thought, oh, well, is he gone? And the next day, they just found it in a field grazing, and it was, for some reason, had just managed to get through it fine. But its one thing was that whenever it saw a sword blade in front of it, it would bite and grab it in its teeth and hold it there. So you might take those as a prudent horse that just didn't deal with being in a fight very well, a audacious horse who thought that being in the middle of a pike formation would be the best place to kill as many people as possible, and a very high fortitude horse who could just survive anything and just was sick of everyone's shit and just wanted to grab, make sure that no one could swing any swords anymore because he just wanted to eat. So you can absolutely have, we absolutely wanted to kind of have these different personalities have some effect in the game as well.
Yeah, and that just comes through with the whole game. I like I said, we'll talk offline how I can start demoing this game here for you in the States, because I think gamers should check this out. Um, you know, I always ask that trick question, what's a period that should be gamed that isn't? You guys found one, and like I couldn't find, doing some market research, too many rules that really specified this period and in this detail. Actually, I couldn't find any games. So, but even looking at, for most miniatures games, you guys have that level of detail without over baking the game, which a lot of designers do. There's a point in time where you set it and forget it. Stop adding, tweaking's fine, but adding more rules, we didn't think of this. This game seems to kind of end its rigor at the right place, and I'm pretty excited for this. And look, to get me to play a game of a period I know very little about, and especially in the detail that you guys have in this game, is something like, okay, well, look, as we said, I have a gaming problem, so if it looks good, I'll play it. Somebody asked me once, why do you play Malifaux? It doesn't seem like a game you'll play. I go, game's tight and fun. Next question. So I think you guys like really kind of hit this right. And just listening, I think we could probably do a podcast where we don't talk about the game. You guys seem pretty interesting yourselves. I got a million questions that I'll ask, once we stop recording. But it's that personal tie to this, because if I have to hear another guy that served 3 years in the U.S. Army in the 80s as a tanker and said, no, this is how you should do a fold a gap game, I swear to you, you're gonna have to unscrew me from the roof. But I could see the research is there, and the fact that you guys actually do some of these things, and you tried to portray it in the game, I think that's great. Once again, when I play this, I think that will be apparent because in the rules right now, to me, it's 100% apparent. And I think folks should play this. When the Kickstarter comes out, please send us a note so we can put it up on our Facebook page. And of course, we'll put your website on the Facebook page as well. But, it's always good to mention it. These guys are from Masterstroke Games, one word. And as you know, Phalanx Consortium, we're always mentioning them and pushing their stuff. So Phalanx Consortium here in the United States. Do you guys have a distributor in other parts of the world? Or
No, we have like for Europe and UK, we masterstrokegames.com is the place to go. We'll see if people are interested in distributing in different areas or carrying it in their stores. We're very interested. We're happy to help. If people want to get involved, you can stop by our Facebook group or Discord. If people are at Historicon, Chris is going to be at Historicon with this game, so you'll be able to.
I'll demo it for him.
Nice.
Yeah, and it looks like the starter box. It's $103 US. Is that all I need to play the game?
And more.
Oh, and
So,
more.
well, and if you already have the models, so that's the one thing. Like, and you can play with any models, even fantasy models. There's loads of people who play. Loads of our playtesters and gamers play this with Warhammer, his fantasy models. Condottieri Skaven is a very popular stand-in. But the starter box has 4 decks. So you only really need 1 nation deck per player, but it has a Dogs of War and Fires of Fate to give them flavor, a scenario deck, custom dice with the virtue symbols on it, kind of tokens with that you can use for tracking your virtue, the rule book, player aids, for a player aid for 2 players that has a full summary of the core rules on an A5 page and an A5 sized rule book, and it's all in a tin.
Yeah, which is cool, and that looks like it's only available direct from you guys.
We're working with Chris to see how that works logistically. I know Chris is also putting together a package that is cards, models, and dice.
Well, that's
and
Chris. That's how he rolls.
acrylic tokens.
Yeah.
It's not going to be in a tin, but you'll actually it'll be probably for less than that than our current starter box. He's working really hard to find a way to make it even more accessible.
Well, I got to figure a way to get one of these starter boxes. So let's see what shipping is from you guys to United States. So I'm definitely going to. What?
Shipping over a certain price is if you pay orders over a certain price on the Masterstroke Games website are free shipping. But if you're it makes a lot more sense to order unless you're going specifically for the starter box, get it from Phalanx Consortium.
All right, and he'll have those soon, I hope.
Oh, all the cards and stuff are already in stock.
Okay, but I see the rules, but
the rule books he should have, and the rule book itself is free to download on the website at the moment.
Okay, well, you convinced me, guys. Actually, you convinced me well before we started talking, and I've been excited to talk about this game. I did share your basic rules with one of our master painters in Milan who writes on the website. And, when he was trying to talk me into DBA, he's like, you got to play the Condottieri. You lived in Italy twice, for the love of God. So I haven't been able to speak to him after he's read it, but this is totally up his alley, and he's a master painter.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to see. Currently, most of our of our models that are painted well are from a pair and two guys in Finland. One of them's like a surgeon who who paints after he does like dissects cadavers to wind down. He's also an excellent wrestler. The other guy is his wrestling coach. I don't know who's also a stunty who paints very nice stuff. So
So
but we're always
what are the physical requirements to work for Masterstroke Games? Like, are you guys looking for X seals?
No, there's no. It's more like we meet you and we leave. So we the thing about I think the main thing about Masterstroke Games is it's a group of people who used the 21st century as their dump stat.
Yeah.
Um, but in general, we're happy to take anybody in. It like, and we're really treat it much more as a community than anything else. Like if someone came and said, "I really want to use these rules for Vietnam, small unit combat, or or Carolinian Wars, or whatever," we'd be quite happy to like, give them pointers and let them belt away. Like this is a really, as long as you let us know what you're doing, we're happy to like help people do it, because we really love we love the idea of being able to expand the game system and like let people play with these things, because we love exploring periods and histories. And I think also this game is a lot, the sense of this game was also for us as a way to present history to people who don't understand, who aren't maybe as deep into it, as something fun and interesting. We have a lot of students in HEMA and the historical European martial arts community. They they may not be as into the history at the beginning. They may not do as much research, but they're doing this fencing. So to understand the context of what they're doing and why they're doing it, and the fascination of this period, I think is really important, because it's a period that's also very important to how things work modern days. You know, this idea of this period as nation states are being built, as it's a crossroads between city states that are going towards democratic pre-republics and despots that are centralizing power at the same time, and what's going to happen. There's all these things that are so relevant to also today, and even on a military side, like how do you build a group of people that are willing to fight for their community against, in a failed state environment? And that's
Mm,
the main question of the 15th century. How do you actually create a state out of these disparate warlords that hate each other and create an army that functions without
right.
eating itself? And that's something that is so apparent in the sources. Um, and it comes down to a lot of very detail and all, like how do you these interact, and what is the real like questions going on. The concept of virtue in the medieval sense is very, very close to the Clausewitzian concept of will.
Yeah.
And if an Easter egg that you might have noticed is the way the victory points are built is you have a point of culmination of attack.
Hmm.
If you press your opponent beyond, if you kill more than 50% of his forces, he has no reason to retreat.
Right.
He's going to just kill you, to kill your guys to spite you. So sometimes there's moments where you actually decide, do I want to go and push the attack beyond that point and just corner him into not leaving?
Wow. Yeah, I can't wait to actually play this game. Um, I think if you go look at your sales department, look at this. You just sold a starter box, guys. I mean, imagine that. Some crazy guy just ordered a starter box. So yeah, I'm excited to get my hands on this thing, play it, and hopefully see it really kind of take off. One of the reasons why we cover certain games a little bit more is not because we're altruistic about the gaming community as much as it's kind of selfishness. If I really want to play this game, the more popular it is, the more people I can play with. But I'm never going to tell anybody that because, I don't want them to think we're shills for a company. We're not. We're shills for games we love. So if you guys can keep that a secret, I would appreciate that.
Will do. Will do.
To no
I'm
end.
guessing all your Marines take their example and OPSEC from you. I'm really happy they do.
It's funny. It's I as a civilian working for the Marine Corps, I always get asked, they go, "Were you in the military?" And I said, "No, no. I was in the Air Force for 30 years." And they don't get that. So,
As an
what
as
was
an
that?
Air Force man, I will send at the moment the cavalry deck drops. I will send you a cavalry deck on
Okay.
us because it's very similar. That these things that are incredibly annoying and fiddly to keep in hurtle through the air in unstable ways, and you have to steer
Yep.
them. And
Yeah.
and they, for some reason, the people who deal with these things get beneficial treatment.
Look, I took a game that I don't know if you guys ever played Andy Chambers' game, Blood Red Skies.
Yeah, I follow it.
And if it wasn't for Doug Glover and his Lead Pursuit podcast, the game probably wouldn't be as popular. I love Doug. Doug was a Marine, um, but funny looking guy. So, I took the game in when I was with Air Force War Gaming, and there was a bunch of guys that these were graduated wing commanders. We're all patch wearers, and the game is so abstract. It's so fun and easy to play that they were like, okay, this is where the armament pops in. I just really kind of did a split S here. And game mechanics are so simple. And I think that is beauty of design, where you can take something that's complex, especially physics, throw it in the game. To me is great. One day they'll figure out how to do missiles, but we'll figure that out because right now it doesn't go that far in history. But yeah, one of the last questions as we wrap up, because I said, no, we'll just do this for an hour. And then people are going to be like, damn, these podcasts are getting longer with you guys. I go, yeah, well, it's because we interview interesting people. What games besides this one and in your busy schedules do you guys actually play? And what games would surprise us that you play? Like we used to always ask the question, if I broke into your house, what game would I be surprised to see on your shelf? And actually, somebody really thought I was going to do that. So, what is it that you like to play, and what is it that you do like, but it's a little guilty pleasure? Remember, no one's going to hear any of this.
Obviously.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's maybe an odd one, but Battlefleet Gothic, the old
Oh yeah.
Warhammer, yeah, that fleet game. It's one that I keep going back to with some friends of mine because it just has a very tight gameplay loop.
Very tight.
Yeah, you have to choose what you want to do, and you're always you're always having to make those choices, which will end up costing you down the line. But you're never sure quite how much or if it's worth it.
It's an amazing naval battle game mechanic.
Yeah, like I think Battlefield Gothic is probably our most guilty pleasure. We also play Sharp's Practice.
I
The
love that game.
Yeah, I think the Sharp's Practice, um, Battlefield Gothic, and Saga are those kind of games where we go like, there's games where you go like, or periods where it's like, yeah, we could do something that fits this period more. Like Saga and Sharp's Practice, we kind of go like, no, this just hits that
Yeah.
scale and that period at such a level. Like, why would we want to do something above that?
If
Um,
if the guys from Two Fat Lardies could market better, they would be one of the biggest game companies ever.
Yeah, I think definitely, and if you're a game designer, I think Two Fat Lardies is probably the source of the most stolen game mechanics of
Yep.
the last 2 decades. Every now and again, you hit a game that's made it big and like, oh, they just took a Two Fat Lardies mechanic and removed the randomness.
Yep.
And I think that's something but it's they're very that randomness is a design feature for them of how they want games to feel and work and the social constraints of it. But it doesn't really play in some markets as well. I think when you look at younger players, young people are competitive. That's just how a little bit how they are. So you have to be. They don't want the randomness as much. So you have to kind of take that out to suit a larger pool of gamers generally.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's one thing, and it's like, hey, as we're wrapping up, this is where I come up with all the questions. Um, Also, all their titles are hilarious. Like, what a tanker! I mean, come
Hmm.
on. And it's
Yeah.
such a beer and pretzel game, but it kind of works. It's a lot of fun. I already have so many of those World War II models. You know, you talk about younger gamers growing gaming. I hate going to Historicon, and I'm old as hell, but I'm a young guy there in some of those spaces. How do we get new and younger gamers that are already playing Euro games, you know, card collection type games into the gaming space? And then you mentioned earlier, he or she. How do we get women into historical gaming? Because they're not well represented. They should be, because I've run games, especially for students that, and this is up at, I got to mention Georgetown University Wargaming Society at least once. Um, they love the historical game. It, I think with your game, and I think with the backstory behind it, looking where it will appeal, I wonder if that's a segment of the gaming community which is untapped that you guys are looking to kind of harness. If not, I think this is a good vehicle for it. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Because you see Euro conventions, but I
I
just
think
told you what US conventions are like.
I think it might be slightly better in Europe, but not necessarily that much. As far as bringing in younger audiences, we have a lot of players that we introduce this to who are primarily fantasy players, who are like between 15 and 20. And because it's a relatively like younger players are actually have better tolerance for complexity in some levels than
Oh
older
yeah,
players, I find. So you give them a challenge that has some complexity to it, and they really like to bite their teeth into it, and they go it. And we have players who we tricked into playing a historical game, and now it's opened up their horizons into historicals, and they start to they're getting into historical tactics, and it's all opened up windows to understanding things on modern warfare and politics and stuff. But I think the younger segment in general is they like a little bit of competitiveness. They like that ability to tailor and tinker and make it reflect their own personality. um and like there's a difference between like being like an observer in the story and that as you play the war game, and being at the head and steering the story. And I think we
hmm
wanted to create something where you like where you have mostly you're steering it, but every now and again fortune will tell you no, you can't do that thing. Even if you put three or four dice into an action, you can roll all ones.
right.
um and then that's a hard stop where you have to deal with the friction. You can manage friction. You can, through your virtue, through your commanders, you can decide where you want to be open more to luck and where not. But it will get creep in there somewhere. As far as like, I think female audience, like neither me nor Sam is perfect that qualified to talk about it. But I think as far as a more diverse kind of um I think a lot of it comes down to seeing yourself in the character and the period. If you look at a table and you see all white dudes fighting each other, I think it's hard for someone else to kind of come in and say, "Yeah, I can. This is a story that's about me," and it's a bigger leap. But that's one reason why we wanted to go with a smaller scale, because you can, when you're doing like divisional level games, it's harder to hide things in the cracks. But if you look at the history, you have Moorish commanders on small unit levels. You have mercenaries from all over. You have emissaries from the Mongols in the papal court. You have all these different things going on where who knows? Like, and there could easily have been a small local guild defense force of women from the Butchers Guild whose husbands are either too drunk or dead to deal with the problems that the local warlords are causing. That's a very historic possibility. There's a city in the Netherlands where a bunch of women from the Butchers Guild fought off the Duke of Burgundy's personal guard with butchers cleavers in a breach. Um,
And look,
so
the guys probably weren't drunk. They just didn't ask for directions. As you know, men don't. That's why they weren't there.
Just because look, if I say I'm going to get around to something, I'm going to do it. You don't have to ask me every 6 months.
Yeah, guys, we could do a whole self-help show on this one. So, my wife is of Irish extraction. So, but she's Philadelphia Irish, which way more hostile than people in Ireland, actually. They're, once again,
Mixed
talk
with
to
the
the,
Italians.
huh?
Is it the added Italian mix as a
Yeah,
chemical reaction? Okay, makes sense.
yeah, yeah. So it's really kind of interesting. So, but look, I know it's Sunday. Monaco, you should be out. I've been there. There's a lot of cool stuff to do. So I'm going to thank both you guys for coming on. Um, yeah, I'm glad that we did this, but hey, I think this was great. But Jack, Sam, I'm assuming you guys are brothers, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, because it's wow, but you sound so different. But we'll get into that at another show. But hey, thanks for coming on. It's the game. We will put some links on where to find the game, but it's Force of Virtue. Not only am I a fan, I'm a customer, so I personally can't wait. But thank you guys so much, and I'd like to have you back as you guys grow this game because I think it's interesting where I want to get more people to play it for totally selfish reasons.
We're looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay.
It was a real honor having you on, and thank you for
No.
all your kind words.
No.
I guess setting high expectations for the game, so I hope it delivers.
They'll blame me. I'm telling you, I have people at cons come up to me and they go, "I hate you," and I'm like, "What? You know my first wife?" And they're like, "No, because if you like it, I end up buying it." And I'm like, "Don't do that. I'm a man. I'm a maniac. I'm in total therapy here. Come on, don't do that." But this game is to me, I think, if people haven't heard in the last hour and 45 minutes that this game is a little something special, then I don't know what you were listening to, but check this game out. I'm excited for it. And once again, thank you guys. And I am going to turn it back to Sean in the studio. We're going to have you two back. But once again, it's Forces of Virtue and Masterstrokegames.com. Check it out. And thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks so much for joining the show tonight. Remember to follow us on Twitter at No Dice, No Glory, and keep the conversation going on NoDiceNoGlory.com, now featuring our own message boards. Have a great night, everybody.